and aliens.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, what do you think about all of that?
Well, obviously, some of the UFOs can be explained by some of them by governmental experiments and things of that sort, which people are not necessarily used to. However, usually when you get into stuff like the abduction cases and things like that, I actually did a conference on this more recently, where I parse out 10 different ways in which, if you actually look at like abduction scenarios, that in point in fact, those abduction scenarios, if you actually look at what the aliens are supposedly doing, is identical to the same things that demons do to people who are possessed. So if you strip the veneer of the alien aspect of it off, that in point in fact what you're dealing with is they're just demons. There's actually a book too, I don't know if you've heard about it, it's called Alien Intrusion by Gary Bates. And in that book, he debunks a lot of the sightings that people have actually, the footage and the things of that sort. It's a bit dated of a book, but in there he talks about the fact that too, that people who are in these abduction situations will actually cry out to Jesus, and then then boom, all of a sudden the abduction situation stops and they're sitting back in their bed or whatever the case actually is. So there's a lot of demonic stuff on that level. There's some that speculate too that some of the craft that we see moving in ways that are contrary to physical laws is also just a diabolic mirage, which they can cause. That type of stuff is extraordinarily rare because God doesn't usually permit it, but that can actually happen. So that's kind of just my general thoughts in relationship to it, that a lot of this stuff, not all of it, but a lot of this stuff is just diabolic in nature.
Not at all.
A bit from a distance, yeah.
That seems like some type of satanic ritualistic type stuff that was going on there.
Yes, actually. And actually the stuff I've read about as far as to the degree that I can have certitude about what you can find on the internet, the stuff that was going on there, and just the layout of the island gives an indication that it was heavily involved in the occult. The other thing I should mention too is that people don't get heavy into that type of thing. It's the same thing that we've seen elsewhere, where guys who suffer from homosexuality and they're active and they're very heavily active, it very often degenerates into ritualistic sex. It's the same kind of a thing there, that it eventually degenerates. Satan ends up just driving them because they're so disordered that he gets involved, and then he drives it more towards a ritualistic kind of an approach. So if it wasn't ritualistic, I'd be surprised.
I mean, there's just so many questions about what's going on, and it seems like nobody high up, nobody that could actually do something about this is going to. In fact, They're just trying to cover it up. In fact, our mutual friend who brought you here today, I mean, we've had a handful of discussions about distractions and all the distractions that are going to come to try to take our eye off of the satanic ritualistic abuse that Epstein did,
right,
and all of his people that were involved with him.
Right.
And before any of this came out, our friend said, I think it'll be aliens.
Before the Antichrist comes, one of the things that we know from the fathers of the church is that there will be a worldwide implosion of people's morality. So, which we've seen, right? So that's happened since the 1950s. There's been an implosion where people just aren't following the laws of God or the natural law in any sense of the term. So we have that. The other part of it is, again, is the unification of the worldwide economies, because he has to be able to basically control people en masse. The other thing is it has to be something that the people that are alive, that in order to survive, you have to be able to plug into that economy in some fashion. That's why they talk about the mark of the beast. Well, we're almost there, where they could literally just decide, look, unless you're going to sign off on certain things, you're not going to have access to the digital currency that we're going to enact worldwide, and therefore, because that's how he could rule it. At least that's my opinion. I think that's one of the ways how he's going to control people is through digital currencies, and he's going to just shut people off, and that's how they'll be able to basically starve people out if they're unwilling to sign off on the Antichrist rules. So it's going to be those kinds of things have, as I mentioned, have come into play.
So we're talking like social credit score.
Yeah, that's right, among other things. The other thing is, too, is we also know that the Catholic Church specifically will have to be at a state where it would have to have gone through a prior weakening crisis, and then it will resurge, and then right before the Antichrist comes, the morals of people will implode, they say, in such a rapid fashion to where this last 50 years will make our heads spin. It'll be that much more rapid. So there's some prophecies that have been fulfilled and some of them that haven't quite been.
I mean,
Yeah.
and you had mentioned the mark of the beast. It's just in the past 6 years, I've heard lots of different things that could be the mark of the beast. The first one being the COVID shot.
Yeah.
The next one I've always heard is digital currency. Another one could be Neuralink.
Yeah.
And so what I want to ask is, I mean, this is, what are people supposed to do? Let's say that they do usher in the new digital currency, and I'm sure it won't appear to be the mark of the beast. But maybe it becomes more obvious, as time goes on with people holding out. I think about this all the time.
Right.
I have kids, they're small. I have a wife, I have people that depend on me. What are we supposed to do if we can't eat, take care of ourselves, provide for our families? What are we supposed to do?
Well, I think there's,
I mean, if that's the only way you can survive, what are we supposed to do? Is the head of the family?
yeah, the way the fathers of the church talk about, though, is they say that the mark of the beast, you can't receive the mark of the beast. So it's supposed to be something that's well, first of all, the mark of the beast is the inversion of what they call the mark of baptism. So when a person's baptized, God infuses a quality in the person's soul, which is a mark. And that's actually why, for example, in the baptism in the Catholic Church, there's a sign in which you actually take chrism and you sign it on the forehead as an indicator of that this person has been consecrated to Christ through his baptism. The mark of the beast is going to be the inversion of that. So it's going to be something in our bodies that is going to be that will give us access to these particular things. Okay.
Like Neuralink.
Like it would be something similar to that, or it could just be something like an RFID chip, which then you just be able to walk in and they can scan it. They know who you are and they know that you can have access to the food and things of that sort.
You mentioned demon of fear.
Yeah.
What is the demon of fear?
Technically speaking, it's actually Beelzebub, which, as you know from your interviews with Dan, it's the Lucifer and Beelzebub and Satan are the same demon, and he's the demon of fear because of the fact that fear is defined as the perception of a future evil over which you cannot overcome. So there's some evil that's coming down the pike. You see it coming, and intellectually, and you can't get away from it. Well, in my dealings with him, he says he lives in Beelzebub says he lives in chronic fear. And the reason he lives in chronic fear, he said, is because, and it's also the same reason why he's exhausted. He spends all this time hyper-focusing on everything that's possibly going on because he said God broadsides me a lot of times. So a lot of times I'm focusing on this particular thing, and then the next thing I know, I just get broadsided because they do not have access to the divine economy of grace. They don't know what graces God's going to give to people, and as a result, the demons get taken to the woodshed. And so he's fearful of getting basically beat up in relationship to that. The other part about it is too is that they have a conscience, and their conscience bothers them, and they also have a sense of shame for what they actually do. They even mention
The demons have a conscience.
Yes,
and they feel shame.
and they feel shame. They know what they've done is wrong. They'll admit as much in session. And that is actually, other than the fact that they don't get to see God, that's their greatest suffering, is this pang of conscience of the evil that they've actually done. Beelzebub's even admitted to me in session that every time he gets someone to fall, he gets a sadistic delight out of it, but it increases his shame in knowing that he's that much lower of an individual for having done that. And so part of their fear, one of their massive fears, is being revealed or found out about their interior lives in relation to human beings. Just as we would, if people found out our deepest, darkest secret, we would feel shame or embarrassed. They have that same thing, but it's even worse. That's a good question. I mean, obviously, we're seeing, just on the grand scale, like in politics and stuff like that, we're seeing the diabolic stuff pretty clearly. But the place that they're making the biggest headway is, I should say, if we're talking about a shift that we started noticing about 2 to 3 years ago, where the demons used to not attack, and now they're doing a full-blown attack, is on good families. Families that historically led good lives, were doing, raising their kids properly, very often very religious, doing the things that they're supposed to do. Now they're attacking them, which gives us an indicator that they're emboldened. It's either a sign of one or two things. They're emboldened because as the world gets more evil, they get more power, and so they can actually attack fortresses that they used to not be able to attack, or that they would never attack in the past. And so we're seeing that it's specifically an attack on the family. So we're seeing a dissolution, where all sorts of different kinds of problems are actually happening within family lives. Usually it goes in the form of one of the children who they've raised their kids properly. All of a sudden their kids just out of the blue just go off the rails, and they can't seem to get too much done with it. Or it's an indicator that they know their time is short, which I think is also true.
The demons?
Yeah, they know their time is short. They know that God will only tolerate this level of evil that we're seeing in the world for only a certain amount of time. We saw it with the flood. We saw it with the wiping out of Sodom and Gomorrah. He'll only tolerate stuff for so long, and then he says that's enough. And then he basically does a corrective for human beings to correct them and get them where they need to be. And that means, though, the demons, they know that same pattern. They've seen it because they've watched it throughout history. And so they know that once it gets to this level, where, I always tell people, we tend to look down on the people in Sodom and Gomorrah, but I tell them, but at least they weren't trying to marry each other, which makes us worse, frankly, as far as that goes. And the fact that, yeah. So I propose that as a kind of a topic, in the sense that I think a lot of people are unaware of the fact that there's 7 different kinds of diabolic influence. The first is infestation, where they infest houses or locations, inanimate objects, animals, as we see in Scripture, where they...
Animals.
Yeah, and we see that where Christ is about to kick them out of the demoniac, and they said, let us go into the pigs. And so they go in, they possess the pigs, and then they run the pigs. Of course, they can't help but destroy them. They run them into the sea there. So they can actually possess inanimate objects and things. And so that's pretty common. Not a whole lot, but a fair amount of my work is actually going and cleaning up places where evil things have occurred and the demons have gotten their foot in the door. And so we have to, exercise the place and clean it out. So there's a fair amount of that we actually have to do. And then the next one is ordinary diabolic influence. This is what everybody suffers. It's ordinary temptation. And the primary way that they tempt us is by putting stuff in our imaginations. So they'll put not just the image, but they can also put the perspective on the image. So an example I often use is, a wife wants to make her husband breakfast in bed because it's his birthday. And so she comes in, he's laying in bed, it's 7 o'clock in the morning. She comes in and says, "Dear, what time are you going to get up?" Because she's trying to time it in order to get this. And then what the demons do is once he hears that, what time are you going to get up, the demons can then they can skew the perspective on the thing. They can jade our perceptions of people and of things, and they do that. And then what he hears or thinks he hears, or what he judges in that situation by their skewing his perceptions is she just thinks you're lazy, right? Rather than, and this is how they can actually. Yeah. So what happens is it was the Satanists in the 30s, 40s, and 50s that taught the people in Hollywood that if you curse the master copy, all of the subsequent copies made from that will bear the curse and it can influence people. That was then also taught to the people in the music industry. And the reason they were doing it is to boost the addictive effect of the music. This is why, I don't know if you've ever experienced this, you'll walk into some like Walmart or something, not that I would recommend it, but you go into Walmart and there's playing some tune and you come out and you can't get that tune out of your head. So then what I would do is when I would notice that, I would just say a short binding prayer against any demon causing that in, and boom, it would stop. So they also taught this, though, that gets the Hollywood people then talking to the people because, one of the epicenters of pornography production is in California. So they taught them to curse this as well. They taught the Satanists taught them to curse this, and it'll make the pornography more addictive. And so that's why you see that. It's one of the reasons why it's more, there's an uptick in it. The curse, depending on the particular individual, can have varying degrees of the influence as a result of that. So we see a lot of people that have oppression as a result of watching this cursed pornography. We're also seeing obsession, which we'll talk about here in a minute. But once in a while, you'll see people actually become possessed. So I knew about one case, it wasn't my particular case, because I do a lot of consultation with exorcists, where this guy had watched a piece of pornography and became possessed as a result of it. When this exorcist got him into the session and got the demon to tell him what was the cause of the possession, he said pornography. So then he asked the guy, did you watch pornography? He said, yeah, I did. And he said, well, what happened? He said, I don't know. I said,
Watch.
oh yeah, I think it's,
Listen.
I think it's affecting just large percentages of the population. Somebody once asked me, what percentage of the adult population is diabolically obsessed? And I had to think about it a little bit. And then the number that came to me was about 25% of the adult population in this country, at least, is diabolically obsessed. So I asked several other exorcists without giving them my number, and they all came up with the same number. About 25% of the adult population is diabolically obsessed in our culture. So it's having a huge impact. Part of the other difficulty is that most people don't realize is that if something's been cursed, or if there is something evil in a particular like movie or in a video or something of that sort, or even in an audio, each time it's played, it's offensive to God. And as a result, the demons gain empowerment through it. So if you have a sex scene in a movie, if it's replicated on 1 million screens, God's offended every single time that thing appears on any screen. And so that really does gain the demon's power. And this is one of the reasons why the demons will do everything they can to maintain immorality in certain areas, usually in the areas of the Sixth Commandment, or as we were talking about pedophilia, which is really empowering to the demons, especially when the pedophilia involves killing a child in ritualistic sacrifice. The demons they really gain a certain amount of power of that. And then we also gain power just out of, our sinfulness and things of that sort. But this is how they become empowered through those particular things.
You had mentioned the woman that you were talking about earlier. She had occult knowledge.
Anyway, so they can give us those kinds of knowledge. I've had, and you see this like in cases in session, people who have not had any serious theological training, when the demons are talking, they're making theological distinctions that, someone who has my level of study knows, but the person who's possessed has no clue what it means. In fact, sometimes they'll come out of the session and they're like, what does that mean? They don't even know what it means, but it's actually very, it's at a level that and it's very clear and it's very precise, and their distinctions, their wording is done in such a way that you realize, okay, this is somebody who knows something occultly. This is not a human being.
Obsession.
So obsession is when they attack our interior faculties, specifically the imagination and emotions again. But unlike ordinary temptation, this is extraordinary, where it's very powerful and very strong. And the pattern that you'll tend to see with that is the person it'll just switch on and it just switches off. If it's a psychological condition, it will tend to be, it'll switch on because something external happens and the person just reacts to it. Or it'll be because psychological illnesses involved intellectual and other kinds of habits, it's consistent and it tends to act that way. So the person's always thinking about this. Whereas when it's diabolic obsession, all of a sudden, boom, they're thinking about something. They can't get their mind off of it. And then, they might pray or they might do something else, and then boom, it shuts off. And so that's kind of the pattern that you tend to see. It'll switch on and it switches off. But it's the demon sees the person's imagination and they can't think outside the box. It's like they get tunnel vision and everything they see is seen in that light. Then they can also move people's emotions independently of what's in